Sorry. Late Lydia and Dimitri, we were fairly close friends, you know, and he never liked he always said the man befriending God, because that's actually what it says in Greek and Slavonic. But he never liked that formula. He wanted to say God loves mankind. But some of our people come to the monastery regularly have mentioned that they haven't heard it said that way in English, but of course it has to be proper, because it says more than just loving mankind, friendship that embraces mankind. And philanthropos is a friend of mankind. Just as if you're a Hellenophile or something, you're a friend of Hellenism. But in any case, it doesn't matter at all. It says the same thing. So last night we had probably a bit of a controversial conversation. It'll be interesting when I get it online to see what the reactions are. I just wanted to go back over a little bit. I'm going to talk about the idolatry of fear today, a little. But last night we were also talking about the attitude. In a way, it turned out to be the attitude toward women in the part of the modern church. I would say the church since the fall of Constantinople. Anything that happened after the year 1000 is modern for us. And how it changed the kind of attitude. Remember, we discussed that the first three mercenary physicians were women. And Hermione, who was the daughter of Philip the deacon, and her sister Eupedia founded the Xenodochia, the sort of drop-in clinics and things for people who were traveling, or people who became ill while they were traveling. And that work was carried on later by Paula of Palestine, but she wasn't the founder. And the two saints Melanie, the grandmother and the granddaughter, a century later. And but there were two cousins of Apostle Paul that are extremely interesting in church history, and completely forgotten since the fall of Constantinople. And they're Zinais and Philomela, or as we in Slavonic would say Zinaida, I think. And they both, Paul came from a very wealthy family. He was actually related to the Herods, as he says himself in one of his epistles. But Tarsus was an imperial city, a very important city, and I mentioned that that's where Cleopatra went when she wanted to meet Mark Antony. She went to Tarsus. If you were born in Tarsus, you were a citizen of Rome. You were born free. And so the two sisters had gone down, and being an important city, there was what today we would call a free university. People set up places to teach. And the disciples of Hippocrates, of course, were there, and the two sisters were attracted to the disciples of Hippocrates, so they studied medicine. And Hippocrates, was very interested in getting magic out of medicine and making it more scientific. So that was the direction Philomela in particular spent most of her life, trying to bring medicine away from amulets and magic and into something more scientific. But the two sisters bought a medicinal hot spring in the Taurus Mountains and opened a clinic, and people would come for healing. The part we didn't get to about that, though, is that they're really the mothers of modern medicine. I had the icon painted for the first time since the fall of Constantinople. I found the types when I was traveling in Thessaloniki, actually. And I had an iconographer friend who owed me a couple of favors. So I had him, one of the last icons he painted before he departed this life was the icon of the three women, which I titled the mothers of modern medicine, because medicine was a tradition in the church from the very beginning. It was always considered a part of the life of the church. And part of the reason that there was a universal free healthcare system established in the empire after the First Ecumenical Council. And the tradition built on these women, you find mentioned a few times later. Then until the 1930s, it was almost impossible for a woman to get into a medical school. And up until the 50s, they were sometimes ridiculed for being in a medical school, or harassed by the male students. And this is something that goes back to how we began our conversation about menstruation and why it doesn't render a woman unclean, and why the Holy Fathers never taught that it was any kind of uncleanness. So there has been this unhealthy bias toward women in the church for quite a long while. And we were trying to sort of get at the roots of that a little and say why women aren't in the priesthood because of revelation and prophecy, because men are a type of Christ and women are a type of the church from the old, that they say in the Old Testament prophecies. It has nothing to do with any kind of value. And one of the biggest sins that we fell into was relating roles with value. And that when people had different roles in life or in revelation or something, relate that somehow to value. And that really is a great sin. That so we try to incorporate, to struggle against that as well as we can. I dare say if you see an icon of the unmercenary physicians, you won't see the three women who founded the whole tradition there. You'll only see the men. At one time they wouldn't put men and women on the same icon because St. John Chrysostom has an interesting homily, and I think he was still in Antioch when he preached it, if I'm not mistaken, maybe he wasn't. But there was a little bit of a Gnostic sweep in the church at one time, where they considered the body to be less than of value. And they considered sexual relations to be, in marriage, to be a special sin. We still have a little bit of that Gnosticism amongst us today, and some monks who almost condemn marriage as a sin itself. But anyway, St. John Chrysostom is preaching a sermon which we call, well, we always title a sermon, "You Call My Words Immodest." And in his sermon, he said that the sexual relations between husband and wife are like a priceless ointment mixed with a precious perfume. And then he looks around, and people, of course, are, and he said, you think my words immodest, but let me tell you, the problem is not my words, but the lasciviousness of your own minds. So this is what happens sometimes, and for the last almost 2 decades probably, one of my biggest struggles has been to offset the idea that some monastics teach that marriage is unclean, that married couples are somehow defiled. And it certainly isn't a teaching of the Orthodox Church, but it's prominent among certain monastic groups. And I think it's dangerous, and I think it really undermines one of the most sacred courses of life. To think that monasticism is superior to marriage is simply a bit of monastic arrogance and pride. Because my first teacher, my mentor actually, Father John Romanidis, had said to us on a number of occasions, the only way to defeat the power of Satan is through growth in unselfish love. This is the defeat of Satan. To defeat Satan in your own life, in your household, in your parish, any place, unselfish love is necessary. And when Apostle Paul says that marriage is a type and likeness of the church, of course there was no religious marriage ceremony. All marriage was common law at the time, so you had cohabitation. And marriage didn't become a so-called sacrament in the Orthodox Church until the 1600s officially, because marriage was marriage no matter what. When you committed yourselves to one another, you were married. And the registration of marriage developed to facilitate better taxation. It was a civil thing. The church became responsible for registering it. The Orthodox Church created a service for the crowning of a marriage that conveyed very deep and profound meaning. But when it comes to unselfish love, that's a part of making marriage work in the first place. One of the first things one can begin to learn in marriage is an unselfish love for one another, because you cease being just I, me, and myself, and you become us or we. But raising children above all. The children are part of our salvation because nothing elicits so much unselfish love from us as our children do. And most parents that I know would give their lives for their children. So this marriage is a type and likeness of Christ and the church in a way that monasticism could never aspire to be. It's a constant struggle of unselfish love. And they say, well, married people don't get to pray as much. Well, no, when married people are raising children, they pray nonstop. There's a constant prayer in the heart for your children. Every embrace, every goodnight kiss, every sending them off from school, and every waiting, hoping they'll show up again nowadays, is all a constant, unceasing prayer to raise children. So raising children, in my estimation at least, there's no greater accomplishment in life anywhere in this world than successfully raising children. This is the greatest accomplishment that a human being can actually fulfill. So marriage is every bit as great as monasticism, and sometimes better. Because the intimacy of the unselfish love of parents for children can't really be duplicated in the love among the brotherhood or sisterhood. It's just never as deep and never as profound. So that's just something we wanted to bring up to finish off last night. That we belong to the spoiled brats in our Savior's household, because marriage is much more difficult. Raising children is much more difficult. I mean, the monks in my monastery, all they have to do is do what they're told. They don't have to even worry about anything. But in the life in the world and raising a family, it's a very, very difficult task. And it's a task that I believe anybody who's faithful, anybody who's believing, is praying in their heart almost constantly in raising children. So, and if our children turn out to be decent, civilized human beings, we're successful. It doesn't matter if they're doctors or they dig a ditch. If they earn an honest living, they're successful. That's the success, is that they earn their living honestly. And so nothing else really matters. The rank, levels, values, all of the stuff is just something that we fantasize about and don't really think very much about. It doesn't mean anything ultimately. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about the idolatry of fear. And there are two levels I want to put this at. The one is thinking that the faith is all about fear and having to constantly install fear in people in order to, as I say, get them to repent properly. That's an idolatry, of course. The other one is the kind of fear that we have about the unknown. And very often, fear is the root passion. I mean, we often talk about pride, but fear is the mother of anger. Anger always comes out of fear, and then it develops into hatred and malice. And that's why when some government wants to start a war, they start by dehumanizing the enemy and making you afraid of them. They have weapons of mass destruction, or controlling the banking system, or anything you can think of to make people afraid of them. And then you can dehumanize them by making it easier to kill them. This is the whole idea of the propaganda sequence. During the Second World War, I can remember our fathers were off getting killed in the Pacific, and our mothers were working in some kind of factory building weapons. And we were sent off to a kiddie concentration camp during the day. We had to watch, we got to watch movies, so we could watch cartoons. And just to make sure that we suffered a little bit with the war, they also made us watch Reuben and Pathé World News. So we saw the war in full screen, black and white, mind you. But the war was very immediate to us because we could see it full screen. And we'd always have to watch a propaganda short. We had to know how to tell a dirty Jap from our Chinese friends. Until Mao Zedong won the revelation, then we had to tell a dirty Chink from our Japanese friends. Because the Chinks were commies and the Japs were good now. And Hitler was the most evil man in the world because Stalin was an ally. Stalin killed millions more people, and he did it in just as cruel a way. The Great Famine in the Ukraine, which he engineered by confiscating all the seed grain, killed over 8 million people. And there's one famous picture that a British news reporter managed to get out of the country with, where a boy about 6 years old crawled under the fence and went out to a wagon and grabbed a handful of grain because he was hungry, and they shot him dead. And so Stalin killed somewhere around 30, 35 million people over the time. But he was an ally, so he was okay. He was a good guy. This is, we hadn't propagandized against them during the war. We were propagandizing for them. We were dehumanizing Germans and Japanese so we could kill them easier. But this is part of fear and how fear is generated. The Cold War brought us to the brink of a nuclear war, and it was all about fear. It was, in the Soviet Union, they were being taught to be terrified of the Americans, in particular, NATO in general. And in the West, we were being taught to be terrified of Russians. And at one time, I was going to Jordanville during the Cold War, and I had a prayer book in Slavonic. And they stopped me at the border, and I got really investigated because I was carrying a Russian book. It wasn't actually, it was Serbian, but it was the same alphabet. You know, the Serbs gave an alphabet to the Greeks, so it's similar to that. Well, they were quite disturbed by that. When I went into communist Yugoslavia and I got off the plane at Lazar, I had 2 New Testaments. So I got the same question, the same interrogation, and everything as I had gotten because I had this Russian book. So this idea of fear that still permeates us. And we know a little more about it since 9/11 because the terrorists in a way actually won because everybody's terrified. And because, you know, Osama bin Laden's goal, as he stated himself, we can never defeat the Americans militarily, but we can defeat them economically. We can bankrupt the country. They're doing a very good job of it as well. But we will allow the country to be bankrupted and destroyed because we're afraid, because of fear. We have to do something about the fear. But within the faith, an Apostle Paul said, "You've not been given over in bondage to a spirit of fear." And the beloved disciple says, whoever still has fear has not yet learned how to love perfectly, because perfect love drives out fear. And then somebody tells us they make up superstitions and mythologies and stories to make us fear. I know when we had the great Toll House debate at the end of the 70s, I went to see Bishop Gregory Gravi about the book I'd written on it. And he said, well, nobody takes this Toll House story seriously. But he said, it's necessary to have stories like that to generate real fear and terror so that people will repent. And I said, well, if people repent from fear, they're only repenting that they can't get away with it. They're not repenting that they did it. You know, really, because you can't repent seriously from fear. It always reminds me of the story of Nikita Khrushchev in the de-Stalinization. And some reporter asked him, where were you at that time, Stalin's reign? But he didn't stand up or raise up. And Nikita Khrushchev said, well, who asked that question? Nobody responded. Nobody stood up. He says, I was right there where you are today. I could ask questions, but I was afraid. And so this is what happens when we talk about repenting from fear. You can't repent from fear. You can only repent from love. You can try to wiggle out of it from fear. You know, Lord knows when I was a kid, I tried to do that all the time, and my mom was a little bit too clever for me. But it didn't work. But this is one, I think one of the diseases that we have is we went through a period of time in trying to generate fear and terror as a part of expression of the faith. And those of you who have been to Greece or perhaps been in the Greek church and you've seen these hideous paintings that are supposed to be icons of the Last Judgment with all the demons and the fire and the smoke and all that. Some of the Greek kids in Vancouver refer to it as the Halloween icon. And that's about what it means to them. It's nothing more than that. But when you look at it and you talk about, well, how can you present something like that? That's completely contrary to the teaching of the Holy Fathers about hell and the Last Judgment. Oh yes, but you know, people have to be stricken with fear or they won't repent. Well, that's a pitiful assessment of humanity. And so it's become an idolatry, fear, in many ways. It's become something that's considered to be a necessary aspect of the faith. Of course, if you read the Holy Fathers, you find out that heaven and hell are the same place, and that the river of fire that flows from the feet of Jesus Christ, the Ancient of Days, in the Revelation. As St. Basil the Great says that the river of fire, as I understand it, is in both heaven and hell. It gives warmth and light to those who are on the right, to those who are on the left. It burns. But what is it that burns? Ephraim the Syrian and Isaac the Syrian are both agreed that it's the sin against love that burns the most deeply in us. As when a friend betrays a friend, spouse betrays a spouse, as when, this kind of betrayal that burns so deeply and causes so much inner pain. If we realize, stop and think, that we're never as unhealthy as when our conscience is against us. We never have more inner suffering as when our conscience is against us. And St. Cyril of Jerusalem tells us that our conscience is our only judge. When we depart this life, he says, don't think that God's going to sit up and open books. But your conscience immediately tells you if you're to the left or to the right. The conscience knows. In fact, that's the only thing, that's all that the so-called particular judgment consists in. And when you depart this life, your conscience testifies to you. And you can't corrupt your conscience no matter how much you try. You can ignore it, you can silence it, you can turn away from it, but your conscience always speaks. When you depart this life, you have no darkness in which to hide, you have only the light. And your conscience testifies to you, whether you're to the left or to the right. And one of the great questions is, did God really, and I think I'm quoting the second American president, John Adams, at this, did God really create a torture chamber worse than anything the human imagination could come up with, knowing full well that he was going to send the vast part of humanity to it for all eternity? And he said, I can't reconcile myself to that and the idea that God is love. And it formed, none of the founding fathers were actually Christians. They were deists or Freemasons. And Adams, toward the end of his life, was starting to rethink this because he was a little bit concerned about the end of life. But this is something that we have to ask ourselves, because I don't know how many of you knew about the movie Hellbound that was made partly at the monastery. And we had to discuss the different understandings of hell amongst the Christian communities in it. I was neither the writer nor the producer, but we helped organize the film. And it's interesting that when I visit a university, and I'm usually speaking in a physics and philosophy class combined or something, but I always go in full sail. So religion comes up in the conversation. And then when I ask the students why, I think I said last night about before 1990, maybe 90% of the students were raised in a Christian family, at least in America. When I ask how many still consider themselves to be Christians, it's sometimes 3 or 4% of the class. And we discuss why. And the number one reason given, because I keep notes all these years, now I pass out a little questionnaire. The number one reason is the Western doctrine of atonement. And that includes the understanding of hell. And then Christian hypocrisy and Christian bigotry are very high on the list, because we Christians have perfected the art of hypocrisy and bigotry. And we Orthodox Christians aren't exempt. We might even be part in the championship league. But this question about the terror and the horror is one of the things that makes people renounce Christianity or turn away from it. And yet some of our people keep thinking that unless you can instill fear or terror in people, they can't behave properly, they can't worship God, they can't believe, they can't repent properly. But how can you possibly get people to have a real faith in God when you taught them that God is worse than the devil? That God is a source of horror and fear and terror, that God is a heavenly terrorist. It's not. I know Dr. Alexander Kalomiros one time said that in the West, he says, people aren't actually atheists. Oh, they believe in God, but they hate him, because he's a constant threat hanging over them. He's a constant source of terror and fear, so they actually hate him. And you have mantras that try to convince you that God is merciful when, according to the doctrine he's being taught, he's not merciful at all. And you go into a modern Protestant church, and you never, they call it worship, but it isn't worship. It's entertainment. And it's feel good about myself entertainment. And I think the reason why they shifted over to this kind of total feel good about myself entertainment is because the doctrine of atonement and the doctrine of hell were so horrible and so terrifying that they had to nullify them some way by trying to drown it out with light-minded rock music and that sort of thing. They want to drown out what they actually believe, or what they're actually taught they have to believe, and try to convince themselves that although God is a terrorist, and although God's out to get you, and He's watching every single move you make, trying to find some reason to throw you into a torture chamber for all eternity, you want to somehow convince yourself that He still cares something about you. So you try to drown out the terror and the fear that's been instilled in your heart with all of this kind of light-minded, giddy worship. And if you watch a rock festival on YouTube or something, and you watch a Protestant divine, so-called divine service, what do you see in both of them? Both of them are precisely identical. The response of the audience is precisely identical in every possible way. There's no difference at all. So you're taken into being consumed by a worldly aberration in order to drown out the fear and the terror that has been instilled in you, that they've tried to instill in you. Those of us who watched movie-tone news during the Second World War, we often saw Hitler giving speeches. And when we see a televangelist, we always have this deja vu for them. Because the technique is identical, absolutely identical. And there's always an enemy. I can protect you from it. Just send me your money, and I'll protect you from this enemy. And the same with Hitler, just give me power and I'll protect you from the Jews. And it doesn't matter what enemy they choose. There's always an enemy. The killing in Connecticut, it wasn't just a person with a mental illness and an overabundance of guns, assault weapons in the United States. It was the fault of them, or those, or they. It had nothing to do with us. And the man was mentally ill, and guns are so easy to get that he just got a gun and shot a bunch of people. Had nothing to do with the gay community, had nothing to do with Jewish plots. It had nothing to do with all the Cubans that sneaked into the country, It's, illegal immigrants, that's their response. If they weren't illegal immigrants, the kids wouldn't have got shot. So you see all of this excusing, all of this finding a scapegoat, all of this finding an enemy, and never getting to their actual root of the problem. A few years ago, I baptized the chief fundraiser for Dr. Dobson's group, the chief fundraiser in Canada. And I met him through a colleague at the University of Alberta, and he said he just couldn't go on fundraising for Dobson because he realized what a total fraud he is. And so we were talking to him, and he was going on. I asked him about this doctrine of atonement, and asked him if it never dawned on him that he was worshiping Molech instead of God, because the doctrine of atonement is more worthy of Molech or Baal than it is of the living God. And after about 3 years, we recovered from that. He came to the monastery several times. We ended up baptizing him now. And it's the one thing that bothered me about Dobson, again, is idolatry of fear, about scapegoats. At the time I first became aware of him, I'd gotten a little brochure from some group in Texas, assuring me that the collapse of the American family was a premeditated plan of the Zionists, because the Jews wanted to undermine the Christian family to collapse Christianity. I said, well, that's odd, because the Jews are so very family-oriented people, perhaps the most family-oriented people I've ever met. But anyway, it was international Zionist plot to destroy Christianity. And then it's, of course, illegal immigrants, and then it's the gay community, or it's women's liberation. Once women get to vote, civilization is finished. It's over, done with. And if a woman gets elected to a political office, like Margaret Thatcher, proved that women can be just as gritty and mean as men can. But every time something like this comes along, there's a fear response. And it's always a fear response. See, what's wrong with Dr. Dobson finding a scapegoat is the fact that what happened to the traditional family was the Industrial Revolution. The nuclear family is not the traditional family. There's even a word for it in philosophy called familism, and it's the extended family, the village family. That collapsed with the Industrial Revolution little by little over time. And then the Great Depression came along, and a lot of the men went any place they could find a job, and they never went back to the farm or the village. They were never again a part of even that nuclear family. They married people who knew nobody in their family, and they knew nobody in the family of the person they married, and they set up And then the Second World War came along. And people complain about single-parent families, but by the time the Second World War was over, in the community where we've been hauled off to work in a factory, my mom, half the women under 25 were widows. And the only thing we kids knew about our fathers was they were out somewhere, and a lot of people were trying to kill them. That's what we grew up with. And of course, we were all latchkey kids because one mother would be assigned to be home when we got out of the preschool, and there would be a little flag on the front lawn, and that's where we were all dropped off, and our mother would come pick us up at 8 or 9 or 10 at night and take us home. That's what was the problem. The Great Depression and the Second World War had nothing to do with any minority group. It had nothing to do with any other religious group. It was so. What happens when you have a fear response and then you institute fear? You can never resolve any problem or any issue because you can't think through what the real cause of the problem is or was. And when we start talking about now fear as part of our faith, our religion, and we talk about fear of God, where when we read carefully enough, we understand that this is awe and reverence of God. In Hebrews, in I think the King James Version, the word fear is used where the actual word was reverence in it. And it just didn't mean the same thing in older English as it does now anyway. When Queen Elizabeth was crowned, she was called our fearful, awful, and terrible queen. And, so obviously it doesn't mean anything like what we said. They use modern English for coronations, and and yet she's totally beloved throughout the Commonwealth. But even the words are something that kind of confuse us a little. But we got this very deeply ingrained, and I know it in Greece as well as in Russia and other places, where in your children, already as children, they're being instilled with mythologies and superstitions that generate very deep fear. And in many ways, they grow up with an almost deep structural fear. Or they renounce it altogether, which is far more likely. Last time I was in Thessaloniki a few years ago, I went to Edessa with a family with children that I'd actually baptized. They're grown up now. And the kids wouldn't go to church. So one Sunday I'd come to church with them. I said, neither would I if I was a kid. You go in and it's kind of dark and dingy. And the curtains indoors are closed for the entire liturgy. And the priest is mumbling something behind this wall in an antique Greek that nobody understands. And the chanters are wailing away up in a language that nobody understands. And even if you did understand it, in High Byzantine, you couldn't pick out the words anyway because it sounds like somebody fell off a minaret and screaming on the way down sometimes. It's sort of like some of the High Russian singing. It sounds like a small pool of demons to me up in the choir loft, but especially when they do that nightingale thing. It's the whole idea is that you really don't have anything to do with the liturgy, but you have to go there. And the old believers have a saying because they have a 7-hour vigil on Sunday night. And I asked one time, how do you make it so difficult? He says, don't you realize that the divine services are given to us so we can suffer with Christ on the cross? You're doing a pretty good job of making it that way. But that's kind of the way it is. And they go in, and I'm talking to the two children, who are now one in secondary school at the time, and the other just going into secondary school. And they said, well, the other problem is they have religious classes in school, public school, which you should never allow. Never, because the things that are being taught in a religion class in a public school are usually destructive. But anyway, the girls, they're telling us we have to believe stuff that we know isn't true. But you find that in church school too. You're being told that you have to, in order to be an Orthodox Christian, you have to believe things that you know very well are not true. So they're being taught a kind of fundamentalism. And these kids already know that the earth is 4.5 billion years old. You're going to tell them it's 10,000 years old. You know, they already know that Greek history goes back further than the time of the supposed creation, according to the fundamentalist view. I mean, Egyptian civilization is, what, at least 2,000 years older. You should follow the chronology of the scripture in a literalistic manner, and Adam would have died while King Narmer in Egypt was fighting the Libyans. Yeah. And the flood would have taken place after the building of the Great Pyramid, about 500 years later than the building of the Great Pyramid. And kids know that, and they're not, you know, they're educated, they know that stuff. So but the thing is, they're never taught the principles of what these stories are about. They're never taught the meaning of any of them. They're just taught, well, this is historical fact, and if you don't believe it, you're going to hell. Something that's basically what they're told. And yet, if you look at the story of the fall in the book of Genesis, there are two contradictory stories about the creation. You have to choose which one you want. Either the animals were created first, or Adam and Eve were created first, and Eve was taken from Adam's rib, or God created male and female created to them at the same moment. Actually, female is the default gender, and female is the original gender. Men are sort of an accretion. You know, it's true. You know, the idea that women are made from the rib of Adam, where do we get mitochondria? Because only females can contribute mitochondria to the whole picture, and you can't live without mitochondria. But if you look at the whole story, God created us for perfect love. And if there's perfect love, then there has to be trust. And there has to be freedom. You know, you can't have love without freedom. If you demand love without freedom, it's a psychosis, it's not love. If you give love without freedom, it's an obsession, but it isn't love. There has to be freedom and trust in love. And no marriage can work if there isn't both freedom and trust. And, you know, men who try to keep their wives in bondage or vice versa, it's not love at all. This is obsession and possessiveness. It isn't love. So you have this story. There's perfect love. God bestows trust, or God gives us trust. He trusts us. And he gives us freedom. In order for there to be freedom, there has to be choice. So the choice that's told in the story are a prophecy about the cross of Jesus Christ. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the cross of Christ. The tree of life is the cross of Jesus Christ. There's a prophecy about the cross. So you can't eat an apple and know good and evil. A pomegranate, maybe getting the seeds out can make anyone fall into sin. You see all the stories giving us this great revelation, and already we're talking about unselfish love of God for mankind. And then that's emphasized with prophecy about the cross, which is the ultimate act of unselfish love for mankind. See, the two thieves on the cross, and one looked at Christ and recognized him as the good, suddenly realized his own wickedness. The cross of Christ became the tree of the knowledge of good and evil for him. And then he said, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. The cross of Christ became the tree of life for him. And that's why when you look into paradise, the altar is a type of paradise. And you see the chalice is the tree of life, growing in the midst of paradise. And you're all a royal priesthood, so you could come and partake of the chalice of the tree of life. And it's given to you. And when Satan comes along, and what does he tempt man with? Well, a counterfeit of something he already has. We're created in the image and likeness of God, and he says, you can become like God if you just don't trust God. So man takes the counterfeit. But think about what the temptation is. You can become like God. It's the birth of egoism. It's the birth of egoism, self-centeredness, and self-love. And everything else in the Old Testament shows people's failure because of egoism, self-centeredness, and self-love, including David, who's supposedly a man after God's own heart. How can he have Uriah killed so he can have his wife? His egoism, his self-centeredness, and his self-love. Every one of these issues is about that egoism, self-centeredness, and self-love, which is the destruction of mankind. And you see it immediately in the next story of Cain and Abel. Because Cain's sacrifice is not accepted because he offers it because it's the law and he has to. And Abel's sacrifice is accepted because it's offered from the heart, from love. And what happens with Cain now, God reminds him that he's the firstborn, that he has the real dominion, but isn't enough for him. He has to go and kill his brother because of his egoism, self-centeredness, and self-love. And he can't repent. He has to kill his brother because his brother's a censor to his conscience. And who's the egotistical now? God comes down, and if you read the scripture carefully, you can almost see God on his knees with tears begging Cain to repent. That whole dialogue is very, very profound and very moving, where God is trying by every possible means to get Cain to turn and to repent. Because he wants to save him. Even after he's committed this murder, he wants to save him. He still loves him. And even when Cain goes away farther from God, he sets a mark on him so he won't be killed, because as long as he's alive, he has the hope of repentance. And God still loves Cain and still wants his repentance, and still wants him to turn and come back again. See, God is not the egotistical one. God is not the self-centered or the self-loving one. It's us who've turned away from God. We have all these things. Even when you see Christ born in the manger cave, and you see the proper Orthodox icon, the cross at the top, the sign says King of Glory. It doesn't say King of the Jews. And the great mystery of the nativity of Christ, the incarnation of the living God, is that it reveals to us that God is meek, God is humble, and God is lowly of heart. And that God has the most profound, co-suffering, unselfish love for mankind. And he calls us to the same thing. And this is part of the problem, that we replace, instead of receiving this great, profound, co-suffering love of God, we try to turn him into a terrorist. You know, he's left the glory of his heavenly kingdom and come down to a cave in the earth. And then he walks on the face of the earth and suffers everything that we suffer. And then allows himself to be nailed to the cross and throws himself on the cross. And dies that horrible death so that we can see. He suffered more morally for us in the Garden of Gethsemane. But we have to see that suffering in order to understand it. Because other people's suffering is one of the most humanizing things that we have. You know, when we see other people suffer, we respond. And even people who hate each other suddenly will respond to try to help each other. And when they had the earthquake in Constantinople, the Greeks were the first people there to help. And when they had an earthquake in Greece, the Turks were the first people there to help. And then they went back to their ping pong game. But in that moment, when people were suffering, people opened up their hearts, and the image and likeness of God came out in them. It's not just a natural compassion we have, it's the image and likeness of God in us that makes us respond to other people's suffering in a positive way, and that helps to humanize us in it. But we overshadow all of this with messages of fear, and idolatry of fear. And we think that we can get people to worship God through fear. And all we can do is get people to despise God because he's a terrorist, and we have to live our whole lives in fear of him. It's impossible to love somebody who terrorizes you all your life. You can't. Somebody who might do something so horrible to you that it can't even be described in human words, and you're supposed to love him. That's not possible. So we've got to stop and take a look at how we regard these things ourselves. If we've not been given over in bondage to the spirit of fear, if Jesus Christ has ransomed us from the power of death, and therefore redeemed us from bondage to the prince of this world, and done so by the greatest possible act of unselfish co-suffering love, and then we twist it into some kind of fear. What happened is that Satan has deceived us again, and we've taken a counterfeit for what God has given us. And that's what sin is. Almost inevitably, sin is desiring a counterfeit for something God has already given us. And the counterfeit looks good on the surface, but then once you try to spend it, you find out that it won't go anywhere. You know, that's the whole story of the Gadarene swine. What's actually revealed to us there is the fact that Satan promises, but when you come into his control, all he can give you is confusion, chaos, and death. I mean, that's what the story is really about. That you go stampeding down slope into the water and drown. You become unclean, first of all. Pigs are unclean animals. And then you lose your mind, and you lose your bearings, and you lose your moral sense, and you go stampeding down and then into death. That's what the story is revealing to us. But the Old Testament stories, including the ones that are not true, the parables didn't actually happen in real life. And some of the stories in the Old Testament are parable as well. And we use them, to instill fear sometimes, and never teach children or each other the real meaning of what they're about. We know very well that Nineveh never repented in sackcloth and ashes. Nineveh never accepted the God of Israel. But there's an interesting aspect that at the time of the story of Jonah, the Jews had become very insular, and they wouldn't allow anybody else to become a Jew. They wouldn't allow anybody else to worship God properly. So the story of Jonah tells us, first of all, that, look, my gospel, even the Old Testament gospel, is for everybody, for all human beings. So I want you to go to the most hated people on the face of the earth, the Assyrians. And really, the Assyrians were so hated that they had a saying when the Assyrian Empire fell, the Chaldeans said that the whole earth heaved a sigh of relief. Go to the most hated people on earth and tell them I love them. That's what God is saying to Jonah. Once we go to the most hated people on the face of the earth and tell them I love them, and that I want them to come in. And Jonah right away is going to flee from this because he hates them too. And the last thing he wants is for them to find salvation. But we're pretty much the same. Very often we become self-worshipping and self-loving, and we close ourselves in upon ourselves. And so often, you know, the Orthodox Church can be dynamic, not stagnant. We don't put it in a jar and set it on the shelf, which is what so many of our people have done, make it a museum piece. It's, if you're Serbian, you don't have to be a believer, you're Orthodox anyway because you're a Serb. Although about 24% of Serbs consider themselves to be church people. 24%. In Russia, about 10% of people go to church regularly. I mean, it's a lot of people because big population, but still only 10%. In Europe, the largest numbers of abortions are Greece, Romania, and Russia. The largest number per capita. All Orthodox countries. All of them with an Orthodox church that's a museum piece sitting on a shelf somewhere. And with a bunch of superstitious monks running around teaching all kinds of nonsense. And this is part of our angst because we'll have to answer for it. The Orthodox faith is dynamic, and it moves forward. You know, the dogma never changes, but so many things do have to change. And attitudes are part of those. Because we gain new understanding, we gain new knowledge. And, you know, we move forward. That's, it was amazing. I started some years ago went back for university courses in neurobiology because it was important that I wanted to write about it. So it would be ludicrous to do that if I didn't study it first. So when I was, you know, I'm partway through the 4th year of neurobiology now. But the things that we've learned in the last decade alone, let alone since Donald Hibbs discovered neuroplasticity in 1947, and the misconceptions that we have, even about neuroplasticity and things. But you realize how many of our attitudes we have to change because we know better now. We don't have to turn previous knowledge that was wrong into a superstition or a fetish through fear, which is what we've done so often. You know, I remember reading how in the beginning of the 20th century, there were all kinds of scientific studies proving that black people could never have adult reasoning or thought, that black people could never be trusted, that they were naturally born thieves and things like that. Well, women were not legal persons anywhere in the English-speaking world until the 1930s. We're not legal human beings until the 1930s. And I think everybody forgot about that until Prime Minister King Horton, I think, wanted to appoint a woman to the Supreme Court in Canada. And he was told, well, you can't, because women can't sign documents because they're not legal persons. But there were all kinds of scientific studies proving that women weren't capable of adult, mature thought. That the oldest male in their family had to, see, we laugh at the Muslims now. Women can't go out without a male chaperone, even if he's only 5 years old, a member of her family. But we weren't a lot better in the English-speaking world up until the 30s, when a woman couldn't be in control of her own financial thing because she couldn't be an adult. You could have adult thinking too. This is, you know, when I speak to a women's group in Canada when we're working in America, I always start off by saying, Victoria Regina, of Great Britain, Ireland, and her other realms and territories beyond the seas of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Queen, Empress of India, Defender of the Faith, Supreme Head of the Church of England, but she couldn't vote because she was a woman. That was, and you know, and all these things come out of fear. People were afraid of, I think in the Muslim world, men are terrified of women. I think that's part of the problem. Somehow, no, it really is true, you know. I told you the story about the beavers and the eagles last night, and it always bears telling, you know, women seldom kill each other over men. But men are quite prone to kill each other over women. And so there's something a little bit wrong with men somehow, you know. We have to realize this. And if you look around, you know, I tried to start a movement to try to get the government to press more forcefully against female circumcision in Africa. And what I'd like to tell them is, you know, it's terribly offensive that our gender is being defined in so much of the world by doing terrible things to women. I think that's rather offensive to us, you know, to our gender. And I think we should do something about it. It's a male issue also, that this sort of thing goes on. And that's, if you know, to seek there can never be peace in the Arab world until there's a male-female balance of some kind. It's always going to be a testosterone society. And that's what they're worried about in China now. They've aborted so many female fetuses that it's mostly male, and you've got all these young men, many of whom are unemployed. And, you know, they're looking, just spoiling for a fight because they're at that age. So we've got this testosterone society can never be peaceful. It can never be peaceful. You've got to have a male-female balance in this picture before you can have any kind of real civilization or a solid society and culture and all. And that's, but then, see, you generate all of this fear about women. So you have to put women in a little sack with a window in front of it, or they have to cover their face or cover their heads and all that. And what it is a testimony to the weakness of the male's gender. But after seeing that gang rape in India, where the woman was killed, and knowing that that takes place weekly, if not daily, in India. I mean, this one made news because suddenly people got fed up with it. They reached that level of education and, where they got fed up with it, and millions of people went out on a protest, but it happened the whole time. And I sometimes wonder if the burqa wasn't invented by women in self-defense, you know, instead of, you know, just to protect themselves. But it doesn't say very much about the male of the species. That we could even, that, you know, members of our gender could even do things like that. That we realize the fragility of our own civilization, and that we can collapse into that sort of thing. And it's a sad testimony to our humanity that can happen. And thank God we've had that huge response against it. For the young woman who was assassinated, she's still alive, she survived. of Malala in Pakistan, a 14-year-old girl, and what was she accused of by the Taliban, the ultra-right-wing fundamentalists, such as we have in America today? She was accused of gross immorality for wanting to be able to read and write. Gross immorality for wanting girls to have an education. If that isn't based in an idolatry of fear, nothing is. The men are living in an absolute fetish of fear of women. And that's this idolatry of fear that permeates so much of religion and is so counter to everything that Christ taught us. So completely, absolutely the opposite. When we're supposed to say, Abba, Father, to God, and then we're told that he's a heavenly terrorist who will do really hideous, horrible things to us if we irritate him in this life. How are we going to call him Abba, Father? How are we going to call him Papa if we have that kind of fear? It's not possible. So this idolatry of fear is something we really have to struggle against, and within the church. And we have to realize that the Orthodox Church is dynamic enough that it can cope with anything it encounters throughout history and into the future. But if we stifle that dynamism, then we stifle the gospel. And that's a great sin. So, anyway, I want to ask you for questions. If anybody has any questions. I'll appoint somebody to ask a question. Margaret, ask a question.
Oh, thanks. I don't have a question.
No. Yeah, yeah, Susan.
Think about Abba, Father.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that I know, that women in specific, that tend to want to negate the word Father as God. They want to say it's the one, or, you know, the all-powerful, and not give it a gender, or call it she, or something like that. How do we answer that to other people?
Well, in the first place, hatred of men is not a solution to misogyny. Replacing one hatred with another isn't useful. That's the beginning. But you know, we identify. You know, not all fathers are really mean and nasty. I mean, some fathers are okay. I mean, we even make good parents sometimes. Hey, my kids grew up okay, but they were single parent kids. But it's just you know, we always have this thing that we've got to create fear or hatred or anger in order to solve something. And that's part of what's going on with it. And that's so counterproductive. It's so like falling into the hands of Satan again to follow that. Okay, we say Abba, Father. I was at a meeting in a United Church of Canada, the largest Protestant church in Canada. They used the church for a meeting, and I was going through their hymnal, and where it has the Lord's Prayer. It says our, and then there are parentheses, Father, Mother, Parent, Other. And the Anglicans always joke that when the United Church says the Lord's Prayer, they always start it, instead of our Father who art in heaven, they start it to whom it may concern. So it's playing into the same thing, the same kind of fear, really. And replacing one hatred with, replacing an injustice with another sort of a hatred in it. I mean, you know, when we talk about justice, the ultra-right, and I'm not saying this, you know, strictly from a political point of view, but from having talked to these people, they think the word justice means punishment. It has no such meaning. It means to rebalance. Like when you justify margins on your computer. That's what justification is to rebalance, to set things back in balance. And that's why in, you know, it never says that justification is not used in any kind of juridical way in the Bible, although the West has made it completely juridical. In Greek, it's dikaiosune, which is to make things right. Even dikao didn't have a juridical meaning in early Greek, in ancient Greek. Viki in the Greek of Socrates and all, really meant a sense of social correctness, a social propriety in it. And, but people made something completely juridical out of it. But social justice and justice should be an integral part of what we in the Orthodox world strive for. And if we read the prophet Isaiah and Ezekiel, we'd know that. When the prophets are speaking, they're telling us that the way we betray God is that we don't care about the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the poor. You know, the prophet says that you sell the poor for a pair of sandals. If you look at the holy prophets, they're all social democrats. I'm sorry, but they are. They're all interested in social justice, and that's precisely what Christ is telling us as well. Of course, the poor you have with you always, but me you don't have with you always. Well, some people use that as an excuse for not helping the poor at all. But that isn't what Christ is getting at. Because the 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel makes it fairly clear that if you totally neglect the poor and the needy and think nothing of them, depart from me, I never knew you. It doesn't matter how much faith you have. When the first parable in that chapter, these are three seamless parables, by the way. They all go together hand in hand. They're all a sequence. And St. John Chrysostom, when he's in his sermon on the wise and foolish virgins, he reminds us that, well, the virgins all had equal virtues. They were all virgins. They all had faith. They went out to meet the bridegroom, and they expected him, and they took lambs. Then he asks, but what was the oil that was missing in the lamps of the foolish virgins? It says it was the oil of humanity that was missing. The oil of humanity was missing. And then Christ continues to the parable, I was hungry and you didn't give me anything to eat. I was thirsty and you didn't give me anything to drink. The oil of humanity. But so often that's what's gone missing in Christianity in general, is the oil of humanity. It's one thing to feel that we're obliged to help the poor and street people and all that. There are atheists who do the same thing. All of those things. There are atheists who are perfectly moral in their behavior. So there has to be something else and something beyond that. And morality is a heresy so often because it's a substitute for a life in Christ. When morality becomes the essence and meaning of our religion, then we may as well be under the Old Testament law, and Christ might as well never have come. We're called to a life in Christ. We're not called to follow a code of law, but to a life in Christ, so that we do by nature those things which are required of true humanity. And Christ said, if you love me, keep my commandments, and he gave us 4 commandments. All 4 were about our relationships with other human beings, and all 4 were about love. The only way to tell what your relationship with Christ is to try to assess what your relationship with other human beings is. Your relationship with Christ is exactly the same as your relationship with other people. There's that's the guideline, that's the level, see? If you hate, no matter who you hate or why you think you hate them, you hate somebody who your Lord loves. You hate somebody who your Savior loves. If you're angry with somebody, you're angry with somebody with whom your Savior has mercy. Every time you hate, you betray God and you re-crucify Christ. So this is something we have to be very careful, because so many televangelists are preaching hate and malice. And sometimes they're even preaching hate and malice against your president. I'd never encountered so much hatred. I had to go to Texas just after the election, and that's always an experience. Aside from the fact they want to feed you squirrel soup or barbecued raccoon, it's
barbecued raccoon.
You know, it done one down one time and says, oh, y'all all have been here the other day. We barbecued up a big old fat raccoon, and boy, was it good eating. You know. They still have the comments. But I heard this and I went to visit my foster father, who had moved to Texas after retirement, and just turning 90, and we all gathered for American Thanksgiving. And one of his nieces from California was at the table, and they were saying the most horrible things about Mr. Obama, and things that absolutely untrue, completely without any basis or foundation whatsoever. And what they were actually saying is, he's a nigger, and we don't want no nigger governor in our country. That's what they were actually saying, but they were saying other stuff instead. And finally, the young lady from California says, I voted for President Obama, and I'm proud I did, and I'm glad he won. He sat down in dead silence. But hatred, real malice toward the man. And it's unbelievable that people could feel that. And yet, if you asked them to write a paragraph about why they actually hated him, they couldn't do it. They couldn't write a reasonable paragraph. That's what I asked, we don't have a parish at the monastery, but between 50 and 100 people who are regular. And sometimes I ask them to go home and make a list of everyone you feel you hate, every kind of person you feel you hate, and everyone you're angry with, and then try to write a meaningful paragraph about why. You can't do it. You can't write a meaningful paragraph. No. All you can write is a bunch of self-centered, egotistical nonsense when you write why you hate people. Hatred is an image of your own ego, and your own self-love, and your own self-worship, and your own self-centeredness. I mean, I hate people because they're not like me. Why else, That's how I judge right and wrong. If it's like me, it's right. If it's like somebody else, it's wrong. But, a man without a beard can never go into the heavenly kingdom. Just go to Mount Athos and ask, and they'll tell you. Or go to the Quran and ask, and they'll tell you. Go to the Islamic country or Mount Athos, and you'll find out that the man without a beard can't go to heaven. When you get the word from your doctor that it's finished, don't shave. That's but you see how narrow. See, one of the biggest diseases in the Orthodox Church is hyperclericalism. But one of the biggest problems we have, that causes the most problems, is pettiness. Pettiness is the real enemy. There's nothing else.
Yes, on that very subject, I have a question. How are we, as Orthodox Christians, laymen, going to get all of our jurisdictions together in the United States to stop all this petty crap that goes on? And I know you know the words.
We were told that the best way to spread Orthodoxy in North America was to spread Hellenism.
I'm tired of that word.
We heard that already. I actually wrote a letter that I got in trouble for, but to somebody. We won't mention who.
Oh, yeah.
Most North Americans haven't got a clue what Hellenism is. They think it's either something you should get vaccinated against or
run from.
Or it's the woman next door.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, Hellenism. Oh, yeah. She's the one who makes the fruit and the blue ribbon pies at the fair. Yeah, exactly. But nobody here, that's so elitist. Nobody here has a clue what that is. And I told one very ardent Greek, I said, the only thing people know about Hellenism in North America is some of them know who Plato is, and a lot of them know that there was a lot of sexual ambiguity in the Hellenistic world. But other than that, nobody knows what it is. What does it have to do with anything? One of the first things is to try to overcome our national ego. And that includes Americans. Everybody saw all these ethnic people. The Americans are ethnic people too, and they want to Americanize the church rather than Orthodoxize America so many times. We don't want the church Americanized, we want it Canadianized. We want to come out and say, let us pray to the Lord, eh? But a part of it is the fear. See, one of the problems has always been that the Greeks wanted to be only Greek bishops, to unite the whole church, but only under Greek bishops.
Exactly.
That's why everybody else is resisting. I mean, this is just this geared to say.
But the Bible was written in Greek. I mean, please.
Yeah. We should, but you know, strictly
I'm being
speaking,
facetious for those of you who don't know.
the 12 apostles were all Jews, so we should have only Jewish bishops.
There you go.
And I'm a quarter Ashkenaz, so so I'm okay. I'm in.
You're in. You are.
I can be a quarter of a bishop. Yeah, that's the issue, though. It's still the egotism and self-centeredness and self-love, and the fantasies we have. One of the biggest needs for the Orthodox Church in our day is to be finally liberated from the Byzantine Empire without becoming part of the Russian Empire. We need to be liberated from the Byzantine Empire. And that's a part of the problem in the church. And that's why we have the hyperclericalism, and that's why we have the imperial episcopacy. At least the Russians, still the bishop stands in the midst of the congregation where he belongs, instead of sitting on the emperor thrown over to the side. But we need to realize, you know, that we're shepherds, not kings. But we also have to remember that sometimes shepherds lead the sheep to the slaughter. So, you know, the role of the people is very important. But the first obligation of the bishop, the first duty of the bishop is to teach, not to administer. You know, you got chancellors and people like that. I mean, you have to keep a real close eye on them, as we know in the OCA. But the bishop's first duty is to sit in the solea and teach. A bishop should never serve without having a melete at the end, after the agape, like everybody's hungry. But you know, we do manage to do that. We have a melete after the agape, but that's my first duty. And it's more, no, why don't you kiss the bishop's hand? I had that experience, by the way, with the bishop. I came in, he was sitting behind the desk, way over, and I had to sit over here, and he, silent for a moment, he says, no, poluberuka. That's Serbian, you know, what's wrong with you? Come and kiss the bishop's hand. I was afraid to even walk across the floor a little, you know. But part of it is our hyperclericalism, because, you know, we always said in the Canadian prairies that we Orthodox Christians all got along till the bishop showed up. You know, if a Ukrainian priest showed up, everybody went to the Ukrainian church. If a Russian priest showed up, everybody went to the Russian church. And nobody thought anything about it. Then the bishop showed up and started dividing it up into franchises. You know, you say, oh, I remember when I was a consecrated bishop, and one Serbian fellow says, oh, well, what are the boundaries of your franchise? I said, yeah, we have a drive-through too, you know, 24 hours a day. But that's, the problem is still the same problem is described in the creation narrative of Genesis. And that's what the creation narrative is about. You know, it's not an argument, did this happen 8,000 years ago? I mean, you know, it's nonsense. The trouble is nobody's teaching the meaning of things. They're teaching some kind of fantastic nonsense about it. But the meaning has gone missing altogether in it. And egotism, self-centeredness, self-love. And that, of course, makes us very petty. But pettiness is the issue in the Orthodox Church. It's so much, like I hate serving an Episcopal liturgy, and I don't have to do it now unless I'm visiting a bishop who is going to do it. It's all about the choreography. It isn't about the meaning of the liturgy. The choreography has to be done properly. And I've seen hierarchs get absolutely furious and start swearing at people on the altar if something goes wrong in the choreography. And, you know, I just go in and say to the subdeacons, keep your hands off my clothes and my hat. You know, mine are on, mine are off, on the forehead, over your head. On the forehead makes a parade, and then they put a big one and a small one, and all of it. Then you take a couple of candles and drip wax all over the carpet. It's, you know, this is all nonsense. You can't possibly pray with all that stuff going on. And what it really looks like is a bunch of worker bees flocking around the queen bee. You know, and it has no, it's obsolete at best. And it's just an absolute nuisance, because When you're standing in there and all that stuff's going on, nobody's praying the liturgy. You're just saying the words and following the choreography. It's just,
And everybody else has fear. The choir is scared to death. They're not singing in the appropriate order. And
well,
everybody
you
else-
know, I know two bishops who throw things at the choir when they sing the wrong troparion or conductium for the day. And I feel like God's going to reach down and bless the liturgy because you sung the wrong troparion. You know?
I haven't met them yet.
No, well, they're mostly Russian.
Oh,
Old
okay.
Archbishop Anthony in Los Angeles used to throw, I called it a pitchfork. They tell me it's a tuning fork. They'd throw it at them if they say something wrong. And the Deacon Vitale was, Canada was much more civilized. He had an intercom system to the choir loft.
Oh.
But you know, the Deacon Metropolitan Anthony Kropovitsky, one of the great hierarchs of the 20th century, with all of his anti-Judaism and foibles, he complained, he loved the Carpatho-Russian, he founded the Carpatho-Russian Orthodox Church. He used to sneak across the border into the Austrian area, disguised as a common priest, when he was Bishop of Wodin, and try to minister to the Carpatho-Russian people. And he tried to get the Holy Synod in Moscow. The holy is a very cheap word. He tried to get the Synod in Moscow to give some pastoral character to them, and they couldn't because of their political arrangements with the Austrian Empire. So he contacted the Ecumenical Patriarch, and the Ecumenical Patriarch appointed Metropolitan Anthony Kropovitsky as the, what do they call it, nastavnik. He was the nastavnik for the, there's another word I can't remember right now. He was the nastavnik for the Ecumenical Patriarch to the Carpatho-Russians, and he brought them together in it. And he loved the Carpatho-Russian way, especially because the congregation still sang.
Yes.
You know, they had the chanters who led, and then the congregation would also sing in that Christoplenia. Very, very lovely. And he said these people have maintained the more ancient tradition of the church, where the people are involved in the liturgy. And he one time complained that he said the priest walls himself off in the altar and serves his own liturgy while the people are out front trying to find something to do with themselves. Sometimes serving their own liturgy, the reader's reading something completely different than what the priest is reading. And he didn't like that at all. In his time, they didn't even preach sermons in the churches anymore. Somebody might come and read a sermon in a high literary genre of some kind, occasionally. Nobody preached sermons. They carried on workshops to get people to preach sermons. But he always told the priest in his diocese that when you come to the cathedral, you see absolutely complete service served. Everything. Don't do that in the parish. You should, your first obligation, he said, your first obligation as a priest is to know your parishioners well enough that you can have a genuine, compassionate love for them. That's your first obligation as a priest, to have a compassionate love for your parishioners. And to know them well enough that you can preach a sermon that they can understand and put into practice in their daily lives. And that's the beginning. So if you can't, if nobody can really sing the changeable parts, you know, the Lord I cried and the Apostica, have somebody read it slowly so people can hear the words and understand them, because that's where the teaching is. And the same in Utrin and Matins. If nobody can sing it, fine, read it slowly so people can hear it. But don't go reading all these cathismos and things, because people can't bear that. But he had advised the priest to adjust the services for the sake of his own congregation. That you can't do everything, you can't fulfill all the choreography and all the script. It's important that people learn from what's being done. So adjust it to the strength of your own parishioners. But it's this kind of pettiness over, and people will actually get into real arguments in the altar about some of it. I know I went to serve once, and the deacon at the monastery didn't, you know, the little diamond doohickey that you have on the side. He didn't pack that. And so he said, oh boy, the deacon's really going to be in trouble. Because I thought, why would he be in trouble? Because he didn't, you know, pack that thing. It's not going to make the slightest bit of difference to the service, whether I'm wearing that thing or not. I can do perfectly well without it. I'm not going to ordain anybody. I don't have to put it on their head. And it's just that they worry so much about all these petty little things that You know, you get in there with a bunch of bishops and they're all looking at each other's panagia and say, oh, where'd you get that? Oh, it's beautiful. I don't know. I've got one nice one at home. But you know, it's sad. But it's the pettiness and the hyperclericalism are the biggest problems in the church today. And, somehow, you know, you can overcome it in your own parish, though. You know, you really can try to get, the people are royal priesthood. And the thing that is almost never reminded the people, that when I give you a blessing, you know, peace be to all of you, and you say, I'm with your spirit, it's a mutual blessing. I mean, people are blessing me just as I'm blessing them. And all throughout this whole thing, even let us lift up our hearts. You know, St. John Chrysostom at that point, St. John Chrysostom in the East and Hippolytus in the West, and several other liturgical writers. When we come to the part of the liturgy where we start into the Eucharistic part, and the priest comes out to the people and says, let us lift up our hand, let us lift up our hearts. And Chrysostom and Hippolytus both say, it's not permitted for the priest to return to the altar and touch the holy things until he has the assent of the people. It is meet and right so to do. It's not permitted for you to go back in until you have the assent of the congregation. It is meet and right so to do. See, the Russians didn't like that, so they added to him, it is meet and right to worship Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But it isn't. It's meet and right so to do. That's what it's supposed to be. So, you know, like we sing, it is meet and right, stop. And then we worship Father. But I don't go back into the altar until I hear the people say it is meet and right. You know? And it's always a mutual blessing between the people and the priest. We bless you, you bless us. And when the priest makes the entrance and he says, all you pious and Orthodox Christians, may the Lord God remember. Don't you, pious and Orthodox Christians, the ones that are right here in this congregation. And you respond, and may the Lord God remember your priesthood in his kingdom. It's mutual, it's a dialogue. But people need to learn to say that. When the priest says that, all you pious and Orthodox Christians, may the Lord God remember you in his kingdom, the whole congregation is supposed to say, and may the Lord God remember your priesthood in his kingdom, or your high priesthood, the bishop, in his kingdom, always now never to ages of ages. That mutuality, that fullness of the congregation being totally involved in the liturgy and being a part of it, is really so important for us. Anyway, we're going overtime probably in the ninth inning and risking overtime. But, so, anybody else have any questions?
Well, I got a quick one.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the angels, why are they rendering, you know, Michael and Gabriel as like part guy or part female? Is it because of the resurrected body? There's no gender,
because angels are spirits.
Yeah,
but they don't have gender.
They don't have any gender, but they don't look like that either. So
well, they don't. No, of course they don't look like that. They don't look like anything else you might paint either. But you know, in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, particularly in Greece, all of the male saints were made effeminate because they thought that made them look more holy. And you'll find a little bit of that in Russia too, in that degenerate era. I mean, it's pretty pitiful. Excuse for icons anyway. But
yeah, we know.
No, I mean, I think, you know, look at St. Andrew. Looks like he has peptic ulcers. It's you know, there is a canon and an iconographic program that aren't really followed anymore. Why do we have the platatira in the back in the of the church? The platatira was in the first century catacombs. The Theotokos of the sign. And why it's so dominant there? Because God, and behold, God himself will give you a sign, a virgin will conceive and bear a child. That is the sign that the Messiah has been born. And it fits in the book of Apocalypse, the Revelation. I saw the woman who gave birth and then fled away into the wilderness. You know, there's a reason for it. There's a reason for all of it. Nothing is done just at random. But we've lost concepts of all these things in a way. And the angels are made with wings just to show that they're bodiless. You know, I mean, somebody always says, Well, in all of the divine services, it says the bodiless, immaterial, angelic hosts. So how did they appear physically to somebody? Well, in a vision, of course. The angels always appeared in a vision. And if let's say, now this is strictly my own, this is not teaching. The only way that I can think of to understand angels is intelligent energy. And energy can become material and go back to energy. Because energy and material is all and gel of each other. But I see the angels as intelligent energy. And remember that all of our communication with God are through his energies. The uncreated energies of God, the created energies of everything else. Energy in physics and theology, both, is about relationships.
I always refer
All about relationships.
I would say like Parkinson's energy or something, but that's another thing.
Well,
Because
since we don't know much about it, I mean, we don't want to get, this medieval thing of how many angels can dance on a marshmallow or something. But it's try to represent something as best we can, just so we know that, have some idea. But the wings are painted to show immateriality and bodilessness in the angels. But you can render them any way you want. They should be, I think, rendered with a little more strength. One of the things that used to irritate me about listening to the lives of saints in Trapezo would be that the woman had manly courage. Why couldn't she have womanly courage?
There you go.
She had manly courage. Or there was a prostitute living in a lighthouse, and she led sailors into sin. I said, oh, come on, nobody has to lead sailors into sin. But the woman is always the guilty one, you see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Always the guilty one, always the weaker one.
That's right.
And yet, when you read about some of those women like Pelagia and Blandina the martyr in Gaul and Anicia, I mean, here was, some of the soldiers died from fright in the prison at night. Really died from fear, Christian soldiers. And Blandina was tortured for a whole week. She was a frail woman. And then, I think, what I think is actually a sin. We say, she faced her torture with manly courage. No, she didn't. She faced her torment with womanly courage.
just courage.
Just ask Margaret Thatcher about womanly courage. Or Zenobia, the Queen of Palmyra, who conquered the Middle East and Egypt. So, but this is one of these prejudicial type things we have. So but they render them looking effeminate because they think that looks more holy or more meek or more humble. And that's why you see so many of the icons from that period of time. Even Christ looks like he's wearing makeup or something, on some of the pictures, with his flowing hair coming out. Not quite like the Brecht shampoo Christ, with the blonde hair.
The main reason I asked it
But
was
and yet at the Third Ecumenical Council it was forbidden to paint Christ with flowing hair. Somebody at the Third Ecumenical Council in the minutes, somebody said they'd seen an icon of Christ with kind of flowing hair like that. And is it proper? And the response was, it came down to us from those who knew Christ personally. He was in stature about 5'5", 5'4", normal height for a Palestinian at the time. And that he had hair bound at the back, chestnut color.
my size.
So the chestnut beard that came toward a point but not to a point was sparse. In other words, he didn't have a full beard, kind of sparse beard. And the whole description of Christ was given at the Third Ecumenical Council. It's come down to us from those who knew him personally, how you should paint Christ. And yet you see these late 19th century, early 20th century paintings where Christ has this sort of flowing hair and all of that stuff, and it looks like he's wearing, some kind of blush and stuff. But it's, we don't follow the iconographic manuals, even with the angels. There's no reason to make, St. Pantaleon sometimes looks like a teenage girl. And but then they'll come along and say with manly courage, they have to look feminine to be holy.
Well, the main thing that bothers me is like Daniel and Gabriel, like shake him and say, "Wake up," because he was so scared or whatever that he passed out. And I'm sorry, but that ain't going to make anybody, I don't think, pass out.
Don't sweat it. I mean, the best thing is to try to get these proper canonical icons. That's best. Like St. Nicholas and Michael Boja, the Theotokos at the back. But anyway, that's all we'll be better told because I think we've done. Reach people to them. It is truly mean to call thee blessed, that Theotokos ever blessed, and no fear in the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare, more glorious than the